I'm a man in my late 30s, and I've been with my wife for 8 years, 5 of those married. I never imagined I'd be writing something like this, but what happened on our anniversary won't leave me alone. It started as a night meant to bring us closer, but instead, it showed me just how far apart we really are. I planned everything down to the last detail. I booked a table at the same little Italian restaurant where we had our first date. It's not a fancy place, but we'd made some great memories there. They even remembered us when I called to make the reservation. I asked for the same booth by the window, thinking maybe some nostalgia would do us good. Things had been off for a while, not loud arguments or dramatic fights, just distance. We were going through the motions, sharing a home, sharing meals, but barely sharing anything real. Along with the dinner, I'd planned a weekend trip to the mountains, just the two of us. No distractions. I found this cabin with a view of the lake and thought it would be a nice way to hit pause and reconnect. I didn't tell her about the trip in advance. I wanted it to be a surprise. Before we left for dinner, I gave her a small box wrapped in brown paper and a ribbon. Inside was a scrapbook I'd put together over the last few months. I had spent late nights pulling photos from drawers, digging out old ticket stubs from concerts, movies, and even a parking pass from a beach day we took years ago. The final page was a handwritten letter. I didn't try to make it poetic or dramatic, just honest. I wrote about our journey the way I saw her when we first met, the highs, the lows, and how I still believed we could find our way back to that version of us. She was quiet on the drive to the restaurant. I thought maybe she was tired or stressed. She'd been busy with work lately, and we hadn't really talked in days beyond the usual routine stuff, groceries, laundry, bills. At dinner, she barely looked up from her phone. She answered a few work messages, scrolled through something, laughed once or twice. I tried to make small talk, bring up things we used to joke about, but she just nodded or gave short answers. When the food came, she pushed it around on her plate. I waited for the right moment, then handed her the scrapbook. She flipped through it quickly, not even pausing on the photos. When she got to the letter, she read the first few lines, then closed the book and said, "That's sweet." She set it on the seat beside her like it was a brochure. Someone handed her on the street. We didn't talk much on the way home. I thought maybe she just needed time to take it all in, or maybe I'd caught her on a bad day. Still, I wasn't ready to give up. Once we were home, I sat down with her and opened up. I told her how I'd been feeling the last few months, how I missed the version of us that laughed together, that talked late into the night, that felt like a team. I said I wanted to fight for that. I didn't cry right away, but the more I talked, the harder it got to keep it all in. My voice cracked. I wiped my eyes once, hoping she'd see how serious I was. She didn't move closer. She didn't say anything. She just sat back on the couch with her arms crossed, then let out this long sigh. And then came the sentence that knocked the air out of me. "Are you always going to be this much?" That was it. No warmth, no softness. Just those words, like a door slamming shut. I didn't answer. I just sat there for a minute, staring at the floor. She got up, said she had a headache, and went to bed without another word. I stayed on the couch. I didn't even turn on the TV. I just sat there in the quiet, thinking back to other moments where she'd brushed off my emotions, made fun of something I cared about, or rolled her eyes when I tried to be affectionate. None of those moments hit quite like this one. It wasn't just what she said, it was how easily she said it, like my feelings were an inconvenience. At some point that night, I picked up the notebook I keep in my desk drawer and wrote down everything that happened. I needed to get it out, not to make a point or to try to win anything, but because I couldn't keep pretending that things were fine. This is not just about one dinner or one sentence. That night pulled back the curtain on years of something I hadn't wanted to admit. I've been trying to hold something together alone. I've been carrying the weight of both of us, while she's been slowly stepping further and further away. I don't know where this is going yet. I'm not making any decisions tonight, but I'm done pretending it didn't happen. I'm done pretending that silence isn't its own kind of answer. This is the start of something, not just telling the story, but figuring out what story I've really been living in. The morning after our anniversary, I waited to see how she'd act. She came into the kitchen humming, poured herself coffee, and asked if I wanted anything from the store later. It was like the night before never happened. No mention of the scrapbook, the letter, or what she said. I nodded, told her I was good, and watched her move around the kitchen like it was any other Saturday. She started talking about needing to replace the shower curtain and whether we were out of paper towels. I was still sitting with what she said the night before, and she was planning her errands. Later that morning, I brought it up. I asked if she meant what she said. I mentioned the scrapbook. She shrugged, barely looking up from her phone, and said I was just being sensitive. Said I always take things too personally. I stood there for a few seconds waiting for something more, but she changed the subject to whether I'd remembered to pay the electricity bill. That afternoon, I called my younger sister. She's always been direct, no sugarcoating. I told her what happened at dinner and what was said afterward. She didn't hold back. She said it was messed up, that I'd made an effort and got mocked for it. She told me not to ignore it, not to explain it away just because I'm used to smoothing things over. I waited until that evening to bring it up again. I tried to keep it simple. I asked if she felt like something was off between us. She said I was overthinking, that I always make a big deal out of nothing. When I asked if she was still happy in the marriage, she didn't even pause. Just said no relationship is perfect, and started scrolling through something on her phone. 3 days passed like that. She was friendly enough in the mornings, made jokes about work stress, and kept herself busy in the evenings with TV and social media. We barely spoke about anything real, Then a mutual friend dropped by my office during lunch. Just casual small talk at first. Then they said something that stopped me cold. They mentioned how funny my wife had been the other night at drinks, talking about how I got emotional at dinner like a little kid. I didn't say much at the time, I just nodded and changed the subject. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. That dinner meant something to me. I tried to reconnect with her, tried to remind her of everything we'd shared. And now it was a joke? I waited until we were both home and asked if she'd really said that. She didn't deny it. She laughed and said it was just a joke, that I needed to stop acting like she was some villain in a story I'd made up. That night, I moved into the guest room. I didn't announce it, didn't make a scene. I just took a pillow and blanket, grabbed a few things, and quietly set up in the other room. She didn't follow. She didn't ask why. She didn't say anything. She went to sleep like it was any other night. Lying in that smaller bed, I pulled out the box where I'd saved our old cards, anniversary notes, little messages she used to leave on the fridge, that sort of thing. I read through a few and put them back. It felt like reading something from another couple, not us. I hadn't realized how far we drifted until I saw the contrast between those words and her silence now. I stayed in the guest room the next night. Still no reaction, no knock on the door, no question about what I was doing. The silence started to speak louder than anything she'd said all week. I started keeping notes in my phone, not long diary entries or anything like that, just little lines, how she reacted to things, what she didn't say, when she looked away. At first, I didn't know why I was doing it. I just needed a way to keep track of the shift I'd been sensing but couldn't prove to myself. By the 5th day, a pattern had formed. She was polite, sometimes even cheerful, but not once did she ask why I wasn't in our bed. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She didn't mention the scrapbook again. It was like I'd hit mute and she didn't notice. The last thing I wrote in my notes that night was simple. She didn't change overnight. I just finally stopped pretending not to see it. A full week passed without a single real conversation. We shared the same house, but it felt like living with a polite stranger. Mornings were short greetings. Evenings were filled with background noise from the television. If we spoke, it was only about bills, groceries, or the dog's food schedule. Nothing deeper. Nothing personal. One night, while we were both in the kitchen, I mentioned couples counseling. I didn't push, just brought it up as an option. She laughed and asked if I was serious. She said therapy was for people who didn't know how to handle life. Then she walked off, opening her phone before she even left the room. That answer told me everything I needed to know. The next morning, I packed a small bag, grabbed my laptop, and drove to my best friend's place. I sent her a message after I got there to avoid making it into an argument. I told her I'd be back in a few days. She didn't reply. Not that night. Not the next day. No follow-up, no questions, just silence. My best friend didn't push me to explain, but when I started talking, he didn't stop me either. We ended up on his porch, just talking until late. I told him everything, what happened on our anniversary, the scrapbook, her reaction, the guest room, the silence. He listened for a long time before he said anything. Then he asked a question I hadn't considered. When's the last time you felt safe around her? That hit harder than I expected. He told me a partner should be someone who protects your heart, not someone who makes you feel foolish for having one. He reminded me of how much energy I've been spending trying to keep things together, while getting nothing back. It wasn't just stress or distance anymore. It was me doing all the emotional work while she stayed checked out. 2 days later, I went home. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through something. She didn't look up when I walked in, didn't ask where I'd been. The first thing she said was that I didn't take out the trash before I left. That was it. I didn't answer. I went straight to the bedroom to unpack. I needed to print something for work that evening, but my printer wasn't syncing, so I used her laptop. I opened the email tab and a message thread popped up that hadn't been closed. It was between her and a coworker. There was nothing graphic, but the tone was off. The messages were filled with pet names, late-night timestamps, inside jokes, and little heart emojis. One of them said something like, "You always know how to make me smile when I feel trapped," with a winky face at the end. That word, trapped, stood out. I didn't say anything. I just took screenshots and saved them to a private folder. Not to make a scene, not to throw it in her face, but because I didn't know where this was going, and I needed to be smart. That night, I didn't try to talk to her. I sat in the guest room with my phone and went through the notes I'd been keeping. I added a few more lines. I also started voice journaling, short entries, just enough to remember dates and how things unfolded. I wasn't trying to build a case. I just needed to stay clear-headed. The next day, I called a friend from college who works in family law. I told him I wasn't sure yet, but I wanted to know what separation would look like, what counted as shared property, what kind of records were useful, how to do this without letting it spiral. He told me what I needed to know and said if it came to that, he'd help me find someone local and solid. Over the next few days, I kept things quiet. I went to work. I came home. I stayed out of her way. She didn't seem to notice. She was always busy with something, work calls, errands, scrolling through her phone. The nights we used to spend watching shows together or making dinner now felt like separate routines under the same roof. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just watched things unfold like a slow drip. Every moment was another drop in a bucket I hadn't realized was already full. I ended that week sitting in the guest room, light off, phone screen glowing, audio recording running. I didn't talk about being heartbroken. I talked about patterns, about quiet forms of neglect that don't show up as fights or yelling, but still leave bruises. I talked about how being ignored can sting worse than being shouted at, How silence can sometimes sound louder than anything else. The next morning, I printed the email chain. I didn't add notes or mark anything. I just circled the parts that stood out. There were lines with pet names, emojis, jokes about how she could always count on him, messages sent at 1 or 2 in the morning. One said, "You're the only one who actually listens to me." And another, "Wish you were here instead." I printed all of it, 6 full pages, and left them on the kitchen table before she came home from work. When she walked in, I was already sitting at the table. I asked her to read them. At first, she didn't even look down. She saw the papers, rolled her eyes, and asked if I'd been snooping. I didn't raise my voice. I just pointed at the pages and asked if she thought any of that was okay in a marriage. She picked up the first sheet, read for less than a minute, then slammed it back down, said I was spying on her, said she needed space, and that I'd violated her trust. I didn't react. I asked her if she thought calling a coworker babe and texting him late at night about how trapped she feels at home was normal. She crossed her arms and said he was just someone who understood her better. She said it wasn't anything romantic, that he was just a friend who cared. Someone she could vent to. Emotional support, she called it. I stayed calm and laid it out clearly. I told her if this was truly innocent, it wouldn't be hidden. There wouldn't be pet names. There wouldn't be messages about missing each other late at night. She didn't answer directly. She turned it around, said I was always too much, that I needed constant validation, that she felt suffocated by how intense I was emotionally. That was it for me. I reminded her what she said on our anniversary, how she rolled her eyes when I got emotional, how she brushed off the scrapbook and told others I cried like a child. I told her I wasn't ignoring red flags anymore. When I told her she should move into the guest room for a while, she refused, said she wasn't the one who needed space, so I packed a bag with enough for a couple of weeks and left. I drove straight to my brother's house and didn't tell her where I was going. I texted him before I arrived. He had a spare room ready for me when I got there. The next morning, I scheduled a consultation with a divorce lawyer. I went in prepared to talk about everything: emails, silence, emotional neglect. I explained that I'd been the one paying the mortgage, utilities, and most joint expenses for years. But then he told me both of our names were on the deed. Even if I'd covered the costs, she still legally had a claim to half of the property value. He advised me to start gathering records, statements, receipts, anything that showed who paid what. He also told me to get screenshots of the emails, bank transactions, and any written exchanges that might show neglect, detachment, or financial misconduct. That night, I logged into our joint account and something immediately stood out. A few weeks ago, she'd moved a large sum, almost half of our savings, into an account under only her name. I hadn't seen the alert because the bank app notifications had been turned off on my phone. I took screenshots, dates, times, transfer details. I sent them straight to the lawyer with a short note. He replied within an hour, telling me this could qualify as financial misconduct if we filed soon. He said to avoid confrontation and just keep collecting information. Let the evidence speak. At that point, I stopped debating whether this could be fixed. I wasn't looking for an apology or a breakthrough talk. The truth was already on paper in the emails, the missing money, and her refusal to acknowledge anything. She hadn't just checked out at our anniversary dinner. That was just when I noticed. She had been gone long before that. I sat on my brother's porch that night, quietly scrolling through folders on my phone. Emails, voice notes, timestamps, everything lined up. Everything added up. There was no drama, no yelling, no slamming doors. Just a slow, quiet unraveling that had been happening behind my back while I kept trying to hold it all together. By the end of the week, I had everything organized. One folder for financial records, one for messages, one for notes and voice journals. I backed them all up twice, on a drive and in the cloud. I wasn't going to be caught off guard again. This time, I was going to stay 2 steps ahead. I sent her a message about the savings transfer, direct, written, and saved for documentation. I asked when she moved the money and why it hadn't been discussed. Her reply came an hour later. She said she was securing her share before I acted out, and that she had every right to protect herself. I forwarded it to my lawyer immediately. He flagged it as potential financial misconduct and added it to the growing file. Following his advice, I froze all remaining joint accounts the same day. I opened a new personal account under just my name and rerouted my salary there. I also moved my credit card autopay and monthly bills to the new account to avoid any disruption. Within a few hours, I had digital records and timestamps for every change. She noticed quickly. I received a message later that night saying I was trying to control her financially. I didn't respond. I logged her message, saved the screenshot, and sent it to my lawyer. Every step I took was now backed with documentation and professional guidance. I wasn't guessing anymore. In the following days, her behavior shifted. She started coming home at strange hours. Sometimes I'd get home to pick up clothes or documents and notice the car missing well past midnight. The kitchen would be a mess, glasses on the counter, half-eaten food, and new bottles of wine I hadn't bought. One evening, our next-door neighbor casually mentioned that a man had been coming by while I was gone. She didn't offer much, just that it was someone she didn't recognize, and that he stayed a while. I didn't react. I thanked her and changed the conversation. That night, I ordered a doorbell camera, nothing flashy, just something basic with motion detection and cloud backup. I installed it early the next morning while she was out. I didn't tell her. I synced it to my phone and waited. By the end of the week, I had footage of the coworker entering the house mid-afternoon on 3 separate days. He stayed for hours. They never left together. He just came in, then left before sundown. The third time, they were both standing in the hallway when the door closed. She leaned into him. That was all I needed. I sent the video files and timestamps to my lawyer. He didn't ask questions, just said we had enough to begin preparing a formal divorce filing. He told me the financial record, the emotional detachment, and now the presence of another man all supported a strong case. After that, I stopped sleeping at the house. I started staying full-time with my brother. I returned only for mail, files, and clothing. I used a checklist to make sure I didn't leave anything important behind. Each visit was brief. I didn't engage. I didn't wait around. On one of those trips, I found a handwritten note in the bedroom. She'd left it on the nightstand. It wasn't long. It said I had walked away from everything too fast and that I had chosen coldness over repair. I folded it, took a photo, and added it to the folder. No reply. The next day, I received a message from her saying I had abandoned the home, and she planned to use that in court. I didn't answer. I forwarded the message to my lawyer and blocked her number. From that point on, all communication went through legal channels. I didn't speak to her again directly. With all the documentation ready, my lawyer filed a motion requesting temporary exclusive use of the house. The motion cited her bringing an outside party into the home, unexplained financial transfers, and a toxic environment. It wasn't personal, it was procedural. While all this was happening, my brother and parents stepped up. My brother offered me a permanent spot in his guest room until everything settled. My parents covered a few legal fees without asking questions. They didn't press for emotional details, they just said they were behind me. I reorganized everything, files on a hard drive, cloud backup, printed folders for court. Each item was dated and easy to trace. This wasn't about catching her, this was about protecting myself. By the end of the week, the direction had shifted. I wasn't reacting anymore. I wasn't begging for answers or waiting for change. I had evidence, a legal plan, and people I trusted. I was moving forward with intention. I didn't need to convince her of anything, I just needed to finish what she had already started. My lawyer officially filed the divorce papers on a Thursday morning. By Friday afternoon, she had been served at the house by a professional courier. I wasn't there. I didn't watch it happen. The confirmation came through email, followed by a scanned copy showing the delivery time and her signature. 2 hours later, I received a long email from her. The subject line was in all caps. She accused me of giving up, of blindsiding her, of turning something private into a war. I didn't open it fully. I forwarded the message to my lawyer, and then blocked her email, phone number, and every other channel of direct contact. From that point forward, everything went through legal teams. There would be no more arguments, no more emotional traps, no more guilt trips. She didn't move out. She stayed in the house, claiming she needed time to transition and figure things out. My lawyer filed another motion that same week, requesting temporary exclusive occupancy of the home. The motion included evidence of her bringing another man into the house, financial records showing unauthorized transfers, and security footage from the door camera. While we waited for the court date, I started therapy. I didn't want to drag things from this marriage into the next chapter of my life. In those sessions, we didn't just talk about the divorce. We talked about years of imbalance I had accepted. I'd gotten used to apologizing when I wasn't wrong. I'd brushed off disrespect like it was normal. I had spent years trying to keep peace that wasn't mutual. Meanwhile, the fallout started reaching our shared circles. Mutual acquaintances who had only heard bits and pieces began reaching out. Some admitted they had assumed I was the problem at first. A few apologized directly. Others didn't say anything but stopped engaging with her entirely. Her version of events wasn't holding up under scrutiny. Not long after, I heard from a friend that she'd been telling people I was obsessed with her, that I was emotionally unstable and jealous. I didn't respond. I didn't try to explain myself. I stuck to facts, court filings, and clean hands. I knew that people who mattered would see what was real without needing a performance. A week after she was served, she tried filing a property damage complaint against me, claiming I'd broken a door frame and damaged a wall. She even included pictures. What she didn't realize was that I had time-stamped photos of every room in the house from the day before she got served, plus full security footage showing I hadn't even been inside since. My lawyer submitted everything to the court before she finished her complaint. That claim was shut down before it went anywhere. One evening, my neighbor sent me a message. She said she hadn't seen the coworker around since the divorce filing went through. Not once. No visits, no parked car, nothing. It didn't surprise me. That relationship had always seemed built on secrecy and convenience, not something real. Even with her delays, her claims, and her attempts to stir sympathy, my lawyer stayed firm. He pushed to fast-track the property division. With everything we had documented, financial transfers, security logs, inconsistent statements, we had a solid foundation. The more she tried to stall, the more serious the case against her became. Through it all, I stopped chasing peace with her. I stopped expecting accountability. I stopped making room for excuses. I didn't win anything. I didn't score points, but I did pull myself out of a cycle I had spent years trapped inside. By the time this chapter closed, I wasn't even focused on her anymore. I was focused on clearing the wreckage and rebuilding something stable, without secrets, without tension, without emotional games. This wasn't about revenge. It was about shutting the door on chaos and finally choosing calm. The court approved the motion. I received the signed order in the morning, temporary exclusive rights to the marital home. My lawyer walked me through the next steps. That same afternoon, I arranged to serve the notice with a police officer present. We showed up at the house just after she returned from work. She opened the door, saw the officer, and paused. I handed her the documents and explained the situation calmly. She tried arguing at first, asked why I was doing this, said it was still her home too. The officer didn't say much, just stood nearby to make sure things stayed civil. Once she read the court seal, she stopped talking. She packed 2 bags quickly and walked out without looking back. As soon as the door closed, I changed the locks and updated the alarm code. I took photos of each change, new locks, old ones removed, time-stamped like my lawyer recommended. I then installed a new security system with motion sensors and cloud video backup. Front door, back door, hallway, shared storage, everything was covered. No blind spots. No gaps. While cleaning out drawers in the bedroom, I found a letter. It was folded neatly and placed next to where she kept her jewelry box. The letter started with a few lines that sounded like an apology, but halfway through it turned into blame. The last sentence read, "You gave up first." I scanned it, filed the image with my legal documents, and placed the original in a separate folder. I didn't reply. I didn't leave a note in return. That evening, her mother called me from an unknown number. She launched into a speech about how I was tearing the family apart. I didn't say a word. I ended the call and blocked the number immediately. Then I saved the call log for future reference and added a screenshot to my folder. The next morning, a friend messaged me. He said she was now staying in a hotel on the other side of town, one he recognized from a previous work trip. According to him, the bill was being covered by her coworker. It didn't surprise me. She hadn't been hiding the connection for a while. This just confirmed what I already suspected. Her social media changed overnight. I didn't follow her, but others sent me screenshots. She posted quotes about healing after surviving narcissistic relationships and tagged her location as safe space. She changed her profile photo to a beach picture and made her posts public. It was obvious who the target was. I didn't react. I archived everything, every post, every caption, every quote. Back in therapy, the focus shifted. My counselor encouraged me to stop looking at what had ended and start thinking about what I wanted to build. We didn't talk about legal filings or defense strategies. We talked about what I valued. I made a list: calm, trust, shared effort, emotional safety. Not huge goals, just things I hadn't had in a long time. Over the next few days, I began changing things in the house. I took down the old photos. I boxed up decorations that didn't feel like mine. I replaced the curtains. I moved the couch, changed the lighting in the hallway, added a plant to the dining room window. Small things, but the house started to feel different, less like a reminder, more like a reset. One night, I got a message from someone we used to hang out with. They said they finally understood what had happened, that they hadn't wanted to pick sides, but now they saw things clearly. A few others reached out with similar messages. I didn't look for validation, but I took note. Silence was breaking. That weekend, I sat on the living room floor, phone charging across the room, lights dimmed, music low. I looked around and realized I didn't feel like a guest in my own space anymore. It wasn't about ownership. It was about energy, about not walking on eggshells, about not keeping track of moods and silences. The house was quiet, not empty, peaceful. The kind of quiet that comes when you're no longer waiting for something to go wrong. I sat back against the wall and let the stillness settle. Not as someone who was left behind, but as someone who finally stopped holding the door open for chaos to keep walking through. The court date arrived on a gray Wednesday morning. I walked in carrying a folder thick with documentation, bank statements, payment receipts, emails, text screenshots, and a backup USB with security footage and time logs. My lawyer and I met in the hallway outside the courtroom, reviewed the order of arguments, and stepped inside without saying much. We were ready. She arrived late, wearing a blazer I recognized from a recent social media photo she captioned with something about rebirth. Her lawyer carried a laptop and a thin folder, clearly prepared for a performance, not a reckoning. The hearing began with her side presenting a claim for half the house equity. Her justification was emotional investment, saying she had helped choose paint colors and managed the design during renovations. My lawyer responded with full financial records. Every payment, down payment, mortgage, insurance, utilities, maintenance, had come from my account. No contribution from her side. He handed the judge a timeline with attached statements. Each item was indexed, with receipts attached in both print and digital formats. Then came the discovery findings. Joint funds had been used to cover multiple spa appointments at a high-end salon downtown, several expensive handbags, and a 3-day resort stay that aligned perfectly with the dates her coworker had gone off-grid from his job's internal messaging system. The receipts didn't just suggest it, they confirmed it. Her lawyer glanced over, clearly uncomfortable. She also petitioned for spousal support, claiming she had put her career on hold to support our home life. My lawyer handed over employment history records. She had never held a full-time position in the entire duration of our relationship. Most of her income came from short freelance gigs, all of which had continued during the marriage. On top of that, we had emails, ones where she bragged about being independent, stating she never needed to depend on a man financially. The judge read them silently and nodded once, setting the printouts aside. I submitted one last item, a notarized report from a local pawn shop. She had attempted to sell a family heirloom watch, one that belonged to my grandfather, listed under my name in our homeowner's insurance policy. I had photographs showing it displayed in our bedroom drawer 2 weeks before it disappeared, and a dated receipt from the pawn attempt bearing her signature. The judge issued an immediate injunction freezing all marital assets, physical and financial, and barred either party from selling, pawning, or transferring property without court approval. When it was time to speak, I testified about how the false narrative she had been spreading had reached my workplace. Several coworkers had started acting cold after she publicly hinted I had been controlling and unstable. I explained how it led to an internal meeting with human resources after a manager got pulled into the rumors. I submitted a timeline of workplace emails and statements from 2 colleagues confirming the shift in environment. Then, unexpectedly, the court called her coworker to testify. He was reluctant but legally obligated. Under oath, he admitted that their romantic relationship started before I moved out of the marital home. He claimed it just happened and said they had grown closer during long workdays. He also admitted to staying over at the house while I was still officially listed as a resident. The judge didn't hold back. She pointed out the contradictions in her statements during depositions, noted the shifting explanations across court documents, and formally questioned the credibility of her testimony going forward. During the first recess, she left the courtroom looking shaken. That same afternoon, at least 4 people we once considered mutual friends reached out. Each message was different in tone, but all said roughly the same thing, that she had contacted them upset and panicking, asking them to reach out to me. Some tried to play middleman. One pleaded with me to consider giving her a chance to explain. I blocked every one of them. Anyone still acting as a messenger got shut out completely. I updated my lawyer and provided screenshots of the messages. By the next morning, he had filed a motion requesting a temporary no-contact clause, citing emotional harassment and repeated third-party interference. The judge reviewed the documents, nodded through most of it, and granted the motion pending final ruling. We ended that day in a small meeting room near the court annex. My lawyer went over the remaining steps, reviewed next motions, and gave a short summary of the judge's impressions. I sat at the table, not as someone waiting for mercy, but as someone done explaining himself. No more justifying, no more untangling her version of events. I didn't feel like I'd won anything, but I did feel finished with the part of the story where I begged to be understood. The divorce was finalized 2 weeks after the last hearing. I received the judge's ruling just before noon. Full ownership of the house was awarded to me. Her request for spousal support was denied in full. The settlement she received came from the remaining balance of our joint account, reduced to account for her earlier misuse of funds. It was calculated down to the cent, no room for dispute. Her lawyer provided an address for the hotel she was staying at. I never saw her. I hired a moving company, handed them a checklist of her personal items, and let them handle the delivery. No messages, no handoffs, nothing left to chance. A day later, an email came through titled Closure. I didn't open it. I blocked the address immediately and saved the timestamp for my records. That was the last digital door I shut. I didn't need to read the words. I already knew what I had lived through. Closure never comes from the person who caused the damage. Over the next few days, I began reclaiming the house for myself. I repainted the bedroom and hallway. I changed the curtains, swapped out the couch, donated the dishes we picked together. I deep cleaned the entire space. Every drawer, every closet, every shelf. Not because it was dirty, but because it had held too much history for too long. One afternoon, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten, neatly folded. It was from her father. He apologized for how things had unfolded, said he hoped I found peace, and that he had always respected me. I read it once, then placed it in a folder with the rest of the legal documents. I didn't respond. That weekend, my therapist encouraged me to attend a local support group. I didn't know what to expect, but I showed up and listened. Everyone there had a story, some more painful, some surprisingly familiar. There was comfort in the shared silence after someone finished speaking. I didn't talk the first time, but I went back the next week. I also started doing things I had stopped during the marriage. I pulled out my old camera and went on weekend walks just to take pictures again. I bought a new bike and started riding early in the mornings. I signed up for a woodworking class at the community center. Nothing big, just small steps back to myself. One afternoon, while cleaning out the hall closet, I found the anniversary scrapbook. The same one I had made by hand, the one she dismissed. I didn't flip through it. I didn't reread the letter at the back. I set it aside without emotion, placed it in a bag, and waited for the right moment. That Saturday, I lit a fire in the backyard pit and burned the scrapbook. Page by page, not to erase the past, not out of spite, just to say goodbye to the version of the story I had held onto for too long. It felt final in the way paperwork never did. A few days later, I received a promotion at work. My manager said they'd noticed a shift, more clarity, more presence. They said my leadership had improved, that I'd become more focused. I didn't explain why. I just thanked them and accepted it. To mark the court ruling, my brother and sister invited me to a quiet dinner. No speeches, just good food, a toast, and a moment of peace. They didn't celebrate the end of a marriage. They celebrated the return of someone they'd watched disappear slowly over the years. Sometime that week, I found myself thinking back to that night in our living room. The night she looked at me and asked, "Are you always going to be this much?" The words had echoed for months. But now, they sounded different. The answer was clear, yes. And it's not a weakness, it's my strength. The house feels different now. It's not just clean, it's quiet in the right way. There are no more eggshells underfoot, no tension tucked into corners, just space that belongs to me again. This evening, I came back from the grocery store, bags in hand, and stepped through the front door. I paused, not because something was wrong, but because for the first time in a long time, everything felt honest. Not perfect, not fixed, but real, and that's enough. I'm a 28-year-old man, and up until a few months ago, I thought I was in a stable, long-term relationship. Emily and I had been together for 3 years. We met at a housewarming party hosted by one of our mutual friends, and it didn't take long before we clicked. The first year was full of excitement, the second full of plans, and the third felt like we were getting into a rhythm: holidays together, weekend brunches with other couples, spontaneous road trips, even long talks about what our next 5 years might look like. We weren't just dating, we were woven into each other's lives. Our friend groups had fully merged. We were regulars at 2 different friend circles events. Everyone around us treated us like a unit. If you invited one, the other came along. That's just how it was. One evening, out of the blue, Emily sat me down in my apartment and said she needed space. She didn't seem angry, just tired. She told me she felt overwhelmed, emotionally drained, and needed time alone to clear her head and think about what she wanted. I didn't push. I respected her enough to believe that when she asked for space, she meant it. I told her I'd back off and give her all the time she needed. I didn't call, didn't text, didn't try to check in. I gave her what she asked for, thinking that maybe some time alone would help both of us reflect. But less than a week later, I started seeing photos pop up on social media. First, it was a beach day with a bunch of our mutual friends, then a rooftop brunch, a night out downtown. In every photo, Emily was there, smiling, laughing, posing with the same people we used to hang out with together. The thing is, these were events I normally would have been invited to without question, but this time no one told me about them. I wasn't even given a heads up. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe plans had changed quickly. But then it kept happening. One photo after another, one story after another. Emily was showing up at every gathering like nothing had changed, except I was the only one missing. That's when I started piecing things together. She hadn't taken space from the world, just from me. I tried to reach out casually, thinking maybe I misunderstood. I sent her a short message just saying I hope she was doing okay. No response. I called once and let it ring. It went unanswered, and the call wasn't returned. Later, I sent another message asking if there was anything she needed from me. That one got left unread. Nothing else followed. Eventually, one of our mutual friends pulled me aside and told me that Emily had said she needed space from certain people. That confirmed it. It wasn't about needing solitude or time alone. It was specifically about getting away from me. And I couldn't figure out why. There hadn't been a fight, no argument, nothing dramatic, just a complete shift like someone flipped a switch. Then I noticed something else. In a bunch of those group pictures, Emily kept showing up next to the same guy, Jacob. I remembered her mentioning him before. He worked with her at some point, and she once called him funny in passing, but nothing beyond that. Now they were popping up together in nearly every event, sometimes sitting next to each other, other times posing together with arms around each other in the background. It wasn't hard to connect the dots. Still, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I asked one of my closer friends if they knew anything, and they looked uncomfortable. Eventually, they admitted that Emily had started describing me to others as emotionally smothering and too intense. That's when it hit me. She was trying to rewrite the story. She wasn't just asking for space. She was setting up a reason to cut me off and have the group back her up when she moved on. I went back and reread every interaction we'd had leading up to her asking for space. I hadn't been clingy. If anything, I gave her distance even before she asked. I'd always let her do her own thing. Never hovered, never flooded her phone with messages, and after she asked for space, I stayed completely silent until now. There was no basis for what she was saying. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Emily had already made up her mind, probably even before she asked for space. She just needed a clean exit, and if that meant pushing me out quietly while keeping the group and starting something with Jacob, then that's what she was going to do. Instead of trying to confront her, I made a different choice. I stepped back, not just from her, but from the group entirely. I stopped engaging in any plans where she'd be present. I removed myself from chats she dominated. I didn't make a scene. I just removed myself from the equation. But in the background, I started keeping track. Not to stir anything up, but because something didn't add up, and I wanted to understand exactly what had happened and why it felt like I was the only one who saw it. 2 weeks went by without a single word from Emily. No text, no call, nothing. Meanwhile, her social life didn't seem to slow down. Every weekend, new photos showed up online. Her at someone's birthday, a game night, drinks on a rooftop, a backyard bonfire, all with the same group we used to hang out with together. And she was always smiling, always surrounded. I hadn't been invited to a single thing. The rest of the group had started acting weird too. No one outright avoided me, but things felt off. The usual messages stopped. The group chats got quiet whenever I dropped in. I'd get told about a get-together only after it had already happened. It was clear nobody wanted to be in the middle of anything. They didn't want to pick sides, and no one seemed willing to be honest about what had changed. Then one afternoon at work, a colleague, someone who used to hang out with us on double dates, casually mentioned that Emily had gone on a weekend cabin trip. I hadn't heard anything about it, so I asked who all went. He listed off a few names I recognized, all mutual friends, and then said, "Oh, and Jacob was there too." That threw me. I didn't even know there was a cabin trip. I messaged one of the people who went, just asking why I hadn't been told. He hesitated before replying that it seemed like Emily didn't want me there, and no one wanted to make it awkward. I asked if anyone had questioned that. He just said, "Honestly, man, we didn't know what the story was, so we went with it." At that point, I'd had enough of the guessing. I sent Emily one final message. It wasn't angry or emotional. I asked what I'd done to deserve being cut off like this. No accusations, no drama. I kept it short and respectful. She read it. Never replied. That night, I got a message from a different friend. This one felt more honest. He said he didn't want to get in the middle of anything, but felt I should know Emily had been telling people I was emotionally clingy and couldn't handle space. He said it didn't sit right with him, especially since I'd been completely silent since she asked for distance. I went back and looked at our chat history. After she said she needed space, I hadn't sent a single message, not even a birthday wish. I hadn't liked a photo, hadn't commented on anything, hadn't tagged her anywhere. That message I sent today was the first time I reached out in 2 full weeks. I did exactly what she asked for, and now she was flipping the story like I was the one who couldn't let go. Around this time, Jacob's name started showing up more and more. People sent me screenshots of him replying to her posts with jokes only they would understand. There were pictures of them at the cabin trip, side by side in almost every one. A friend told me they weren't officially dating yet, but admitted they'd gotten very close, very quickly. Another friend said they were always sitting next to each other now, not making it obvious, but everyone had picked up on the shift. It was becoming clearer with every passing day. That whole speech about needing space, it wasn't about her finding herself. It was about finding a smooth exit and having time to explore something new with Jacob without feeling guilty. I didn't see any point in continuing to monitor any of it. I blocked Emily on everything: phone, Instagram, Facebook, even LinkedIn. I didn't want to accidentally come across her posts, and I definitely didn't want to give her any excuse to reach out later if things with Jacob didn't work out. Once someone's out, they're out. I also left the bigger group chats. Not because I was angry at the group, but because the energy had changed. She dominated most of the conversation, and it felt like people were afraid to challenge whatever version of the story she was selling. I didn't need to sit around reading inside jokes between her and Jacob, or watch people pretend nothing was happening. There was one friend I trusted enough to speak with openly. I told him everything, from the moment she asked for space, to the photos, to the messages, to how I had been completely silent the entire time. I laid it all out, start to finish. For once, I didn't hear "just let it go" or "it's not worth it." Instead, he said something I hadn't heard yet. "I think you're right. Something's off about all of this." That was the first time it felt like someone saw what I saw. That I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined all of this. I wasn't looking for people to turn on her. I wasn't trying to rally support, but hearing someone else say out loud what I'd only been thinking in silence made a difference. It made me realize that I wasn't the one rewriting history. I was the one left out of it. And maybe it was time to stop trying to understand what happened and start moving forward without waiting for answers that were never going to come. After cutting off all contact with Emily and stepping out of the social spaces she controlled, I focused on fixing my daily life. I started waking up earlier, hit the gym more consistently, and got serious about journaling, just so I had some record of how things happened. I didn't expect anything dramatic, but I needed some structure. I stayed away from our usual haunts and tried not to get pulled into any gossip. About 3 weeks after I blocked her, Amanda, one of the only mutual friends who hadn't completely disappeared, messaged me out of the blue. We used to be close through group events, but since the split, she had gone quiet. She asked if we could talk for a bit, and I agreed to meet in a public setting with no expectations. She came over that evening and brought coffee, like we used to do back when things were normal. She apologized first for going silent. She said everything got awkward fast, and that she didn't want to get involved. But now she felt uncomfortable with what she'd been hearing. Emily had apparently told a few people that I was emotionally intense and didn't respect boundaries. That was her reason for asking for space, according to Amanda. I pulled up my last message to Emily and handed Amanda my phone. It was the same message she left on read: calm, short, polite. I had ended it with, "Take all the time you need. I'll give you space." Amanda looked at it for a few seconds and just said, "This doesn't match what she told people." She went on to say that Emily never really pulled back from the group at all. She was still showing up at everything: trivia nights, brunch, even casual hangouts. She'd started introducing Jacob to everyone, saying they clicked recently, and most people just accepted it. Amanda said it was strange how quickly things moved between them, especially after Emily claimed she needed time alone. A few days later, another friend I hadn't spoken to in a while called me during lunch. He told me straight up that Emily and Jacob were definitely seeing each other, but were avoiding calling it a relationship publicly. He said everyone in the group had pretty much accepted it without asking too many questions. At this point, the picture was fully clear. The space talk had been a cover, a way to walk away quietly and shift the narrative before anyone questioned what was going on. I hadn't done anything wrong. I gave her distance. I stayed out of her way, and in return, she flipped the story so she wouldn't feel guilty starting something new. Then something weird happened. One evening, while checking my Instagram story views, I saw a familiar-looking handle buried in the list, a second account I didn't recognize at first, but the profile picture gave it away. It was Emily. She had viewed my story using a backup account. I blocked it immediately. When I told Amanda, she just shook her head and said more people were starting to catch on. A few folks had noticed how lopsided the whole thing was. Emily was socializing as if nothing happened, and I had just vanished overnight. No fight, no drama, nothing. People were quietly admitting it didn't make sense. A few days later, I decided to test the waters. I invited Amanda and two friends, both outside Emily's tight circle, over for a small dinner at my place. Nothing fancy. Just food, music, and a movie afterward. I wanted to see if I could hang out with people again without everything feeling heavy or fake. The night went better than I expected. No awkward questions, no weird silences, just normal conversation, a lot of dumb jokes, and a relaxed vibe I hadn't felt in months. At one point, after a couple drinks, one of them said, "It's crazy how she framed you like some obsessive ex when you just disappeared and said nothing." That stuck with me. I hadn't tried to defend myself publicly. I hadn't sent rants to anyone. I hadn't begged for explanations. I just disappeared and let her have the stage. But it turned out that silence carried its own kind of weight. The people who paid attention were starting to notice that her version of the story didn't add up. By the end of the night, I realized something important. Not everything had fallen apart. Some friendships were still real, some people could see through the noise. And even though I wasn't going to fix everything overnight, the cracks in the false narrative were starting to show. Emily had spent weeks controlling the story, but stories don't always hold forever, not when they're built on lies. And now, for the first time since all of this started, I wasn't the only one who saw it. One of my coworkers invited me to a game night at his place, someone completely outside the friend circle Emily was part of. I hadn't said yes to anything social in a while, but I figured it was low risk. Different crowd, neutral setting, and a good way to clear my head. I showed up late, brought snacks, and kept it casual. Most of the people there were chill, some I had met briefly before, and it felt good to be somewhere I didn't have to explain anything. Around an hour into the night, Emily walked in. She wasn't alone. Jacob was with her, no big announcement, no over-the-top gestures, but they sat close together, shared a drink, whispered a few things to each other. It was obvious what the dynamic was. A few people paused when they noticed the situation. Someone glanced at me, probably waiting for a reaction, but I didn't give them one. I didn't flinch, didn't stare, didn't get up. I kept playing the game, cracked a few jokes, and stayed focused on my side of the room. If anything, I was relieved they didn't try to make a scene out of arriving. Later that night, a friend I'd known for a while pulled me aside during a break in the games. He said he was surprised I didn't react, because apparently Emily had told a few people that I might get emotional if she showed up with Jacob. That caught me off guard. She had come prepared for a confrontation I never intended to start. It started making sense. Emily wasn't just ignoring me, she was laying the groundwork, telling people how to view me before I even had the chance to speak. Another person from the party reached out the next day and told me Emily had mentioned I was still not over her and probably creating tension on purpose. I knew these weren't random exaggerations. She was trying to protect her image before any truth slipped through. She was making sure if anything did come out, people would already be primed to blame me. I showed one of those friends the only message I had ever sent Emily after she asked for space. Before I blocked her, I let him read it for himself. One paragraph. Respectful tone, no insults, no desperation. He looked surprised and just nodded. He admitted it didn't line up with what he'd been told. Over the next few days, I started getting a few check-ins, messages from people who hadn't said anything in weeks. Some were just light conversation starters, like nothing had happened. Others came with a tone of curiosity, polite, careful, and clearly fishing to hear my version. I didn't tell anyone everything, but I gave a few of them enough that they could compare what I was saying with what they'd already been told. One couple, old friends of both mine and Emily's, finally admitted they had kept their distance because they assumed I had done something. They apologized and said they hadn't even asked me what happened. They just went along with the group's vibe. I didn't hold it against them, but I thanked them for at least being honest. Then one of them sent me screenshots. They were from a side group chat where Emily had been talking before she even asked for space. In those messages, she claimed I was emotionally unstable, that I couldn't handle independence, and that she had been feeling drained for months. It was clear she had started planting that story before we even broke up. She didn't just cut me off, she had built a whole version of me that made the breakup easier for her to justify. If people believed I was unstable or controlling, then she could move on without being questioned. She could date Jacob without being accused of overlap. She could spin the situation however she needed. Amanda messaged me again that week. She said the group chat dynamics were shifting. People weren't replying to Emily as quickly. Some were ignoring her messages entirely. She seemed more anxious, more controlling, even throwing shade at people who didn't validate her stories. Amanda said she was acting paranoid. I didn't plan to fight back. I wasn't going to post anything or start messaging people with evidence. But I saved the screenshots. I saved every message, every voice note, every quiet confirmation someone gave me. I didn't want to burn bridges, but if Emily pushed again, I'd be ready to defend myself. For now, I just watched. The story she built was starting to crack, and this time she couldn't silence it by pretending I was the problem. A few weeks after that game night, I got a text from an unknown number. Someone I later learned got my number from a mutual friend. The message was short, a vague request to meet and find closure. No name, no context, but the phrasing was familiar. I knew immediately it was from Emily. I had already blocked her on every platform. There was no way she should have had my number, unless someone gave it to her. I scrolled through recent contacts and figured out who it was. One mutual friend who had stayed mostly neutral since the breakup. I called him and asked directly if he gave out my number. He admitted he had, said he thought maybe a conversation between us would help clear things up. I told him straight, I wasn't interested, and giving out my number without asking was a huge overstep. He apologized and promised it wouldn't happen again. I didn't reply to Emily's message. At this point, it was obvious she wasn't looking for clarity. It was damage control. People were starting to see through her story, and now she was probably trying to patch things up before more cracks showed. About a week later, I heard from someone who had been at a recent group event. Emily and Jacob had gotten into a public argument. It wasn't a shouting match, but enough people noticed that something was off. Jacob apparently accused her of keeping things from him, specifically about our past. He had only just learned how long we'd been together, 3 years, and felt like he'd been left in the dark. That same night, another friend confirmed that Emily had started talking to Jacob long before the I need space moment. The timelines overlapped. She had started getting close to him while we were still dating, even if nothing physical happened right away. She just left that part out when retelling the story. A couple of days later, Jacob messaged me out of nowhere. His tone was aggressive. He accused me of still being obsessed and poisoning people against them. It came out of nowhere. I hadn't spoken about him publicly. I hadn't messaged anyone about him. I hadn't even mentioned his name in any group settings. I blocked his number without replying and saved the message just in case. I wanted a record, nothing more. Amanda caught up with me later that week. She had heard that Emily was now telling people Jacob was manipulative and controlling. It was the same language she once used about me. Same phrasing, same spin, like she had a script for every breakup, one where she always came out as the person who just needed peace and everyone else had been too much to handle. At this point, the friend group started to crack. People weren't openly fighting, but things were shifting. Small side chats were forming. Some people were stepping away altogether. No one really knew what to believe anymore. One old friend messaged me privately and said he realized something didn't add up. Months ago, Emily had told him I was jealous of her career, which made him think I was insecure and bitter. But now he was hearing a completely different version from others. That made it 3 separate stories from Emily: emotionally clingy, jealous of her professional success, unstable after the breakup, all different depending on the audience, and all conveniently crafted to put her in the position of the exhausted, misunderstood victim. So I started keeping a quiet timeline of events. Nothing public, just dates, messages, things people told me, and when. I wasn't building it to call anyone out, but I was tired of watching her bend reality into whatever version suited her next move. I needed something solid to remind myself of what actually happened, not the version everyone else was hearing secondhand. Even though the pressure to react was building, I didn't confront Jacob. I didn't message Emily. I didn't make group announcements or drop any screenshots. I just held on to what I had. And I made a quiet decision. If this ever reached a point where her lies started causing real damage, where people turned hostile or false stories got out of control, then I'd respond. But only with facts. Only with the truth. Until then, I kept watching the web she spun start to fall apart from the inside. The lies were catching up to her. All I had to do was stay out of the way and let the truth keep leaking through. I ended up running into Brian at a mutual friend's art show. We hadn't spoken in nearly a year, not since he quietly faded from the group. We got to talking over drinks, and it didn't take long before the topic of Emily came up. Turns out, his departure hadn't been random. A year earlier, he'd had a falling out with her that looked suspiciously familiar. He told me that Emily had twisted a casual disagreement into something bigger. She told the group he was aggressive, unreliable, and negative to be around. Without confronting him directly, she slowly turned people against him, and rather than fight it, he just walked away. Listening to him describe it, it was like hearing my own story told back to me from a year earlier. A few days after that conversation, someone else messaged me. Not someone I was close to, but a mutual acquaintance who had stayed neutral. They asked to stay anonymous, but told me that once, Emily encouraged her to ghost a guy she was dating because he was too emotional. No abuse, no boundary crossing, just too emotional. That same phrasing Emily had used about me when she first started pushing me out. It was becoming clearer. Emily had a pattern, severing ties without explanation, rewriting the story in a way that always made her the calm one, the one who just had to walk away from someone else's instability. And because she did it subtly, with vague accusations and half-truths, no one pushed back. Amanda filled me in on something else. Jacob hadn't been to any recent gatherings. His name barely came up, and when it did, the energy shifted. She said Emily got tense whenever he was mentioned, and that people were starting to guess things had gone south. Then word started spreading about something she told a coworker, that Jacob had pursued her too hard and made her feel like she couldn't breathe. This was the same Jacob she'd introduced to everyone as someone she clicked with naturally. The version she told at the start didn't match the version she was telling now. She had flipped the story again, just like before. Meanwhile, the group chat, the one that used to buzz all day with plans, jokes, and nonsense, started dying out. People muted it. A couple left without saying anything. The mood had changed. It was like no one wanted to be the next person Emily rebranded. Then one of the quieter friends forwarded me a voice note Emily had sent privately. In it, she said her relationship with Jacob felt forced from the start, and that I had been emotionally toxic and hard to recover from. She wasn't just distancing herself from Jacob now, she was building a reason to walk away from him, just like she had with me. It was the same cycle: pull close, quietly isolate, reframe the story, then exit clean with everyone still on her side. Only now, The cracks were showing. Someone finally broke the silence in the main group chat. After another one of Emily's passive-aggressive messages, they replied, "It's weird how every person you cut off turns out to be toxic. That's a lot of toxic people for one life." The message got no immediate replies, but it was seen. That was the first time anyone had challenged her openly. That same day, a few people messaged me privately. Some said they had always had doubts but didn't want to say anything and end up like Brian or me. Others admitted they felt manipulated by how smoothly Emily controlled the room. None of them were looking to start drama. They just wanted me to know they had noticed. Emily left the group chat later that week. No announcement, no excuse, just gone. Her Instagram account went offline not long after, deactivated or deleted. No one knew for sure, but people noticed. And this time, no one reached out asking where she went. I didn't respond to anything. I didn't message her. I didn't make posts or say I told you so. I just let things happen. For the first time since all of this started, I wasn't chasing clarity. I wasn't collecting proof. I wasn't trying to correct her version of things. The truth was finally catching up on its own. And if it kept doing that, I wasn't going to get in its way. News started spreading that Emily was once again flipping the narrative. This time telling people she had been emotionally manipulated. Not just by me, but now by Jacob too. It was the third version of events I'd heard through the grapevine. And by now, a few mutuals were clearly catching on to the pattern. One of them forwarded a message she had sent into a side group chat, where she called herself a survivor of 2 toxic relationships in a row. The timing was almost too neat. Jacob, who had been quiet for weeks, apparently had enough. One of Amanda's friends told her that he'd been venting in private, saying Emily used him as a rebound, exaggerated what really happened between them, and twisted things when the relationship stopped being convenient. He told a few people he regretted getting involved, and that she had left out a lot about her past, including the full timeline of her previous relationship, when they first started talking. 3 separate people confirmed what most had already guessed. Jacob and Emily were officially done. The final straw was a heated argument at a mutual friend's house. She had shown up late, Jacob was already there, and they ended up arguing in the kitchen loud enough that the host had to step in. Jacob walked out before the night ended and didn't come back. Not long after that, I got a message from someone in Jacob's circle. He told me Jacob had finally learned how long Emily and I had been together, and it completely changed how he saw everything. Apparently, Emily had told him we were just a brief thing that fizzled out, not a 3-year relationship. When he learned the full timeline, it hit him that she had been rewriting her past from the start. I wasn't even thinking about Emily at that point, but my name kept popping back up in conversations I wasn't even part of. Amanda called me one evening to give me a heads up. Emily had reached out to her, asking if she'd pass along a message. She wanted to meet for closure. Amanda made it clear she didn't want to be involved, and only agreed to tell me once. I told her to let Emily know I wasn't interested. She was blocked for a reason, and that wasn't going to change. That weekend, I threw a barbecue at my place. Small group, just people from work and a few new friends who had no connection to the old circle. It was the first event I'd hosted since everything started. No drama, no tension, just music, food, and laughter. One of the guests, a friend of a friend, mentioned she used to know Emily from a totally different context years ago. Without prompting, she brought up how Emily had pulled the same "I need space" move on another guy, disappeared overnight, then told everyone the breakup was because he was unstable. That guy had never defended himself publicly, so the story stuck. The guest didn't know what had been going on with me. She just casually shared the story, thinking it was a strange coincidence. But it wasn't. It was a pattern. Around the same time, a few of Emily's closer allies started declining her invites. Not dramatically, just not showing up, not replying to plans, backing out last minute. One of them finally told her directly, "Your stories don't line up anymore. You always disappear, then reappear with a new villain." Someone else in the group confirmed it. They'd heard the same line more than once now. Shortly after that, Emily deleted her backup Instagram account, the one she'd used to view my story before. Then her main account vanished too, and her name stopped showing up on any active chats or friend lists. For a few days, it was like she'd disappeared completely. No one said it out loud, but people started whispering that she might be spiraling now that her usual approach wasn't working. I started to notice something else about the way Emily operated. She used silence like a tool. When she needed sympathy, she vanished. When she needed attention, she reappeared with a softened version of the truth. She could always reset the story by staying quiet long enough, and then resurfacing with just enough charm to pull people back in. But this time, fewer people seemed willing to play along. I didn't chase her silence. I didn't make any announcements. I didn't ask what was going on behind the scenes. I focused on my life, my friends, and the space I had carved out for myself after all the noise. But one thing became clearer the more I stepped back. Even after she was out of my life, the ripple effects of what she'd done were still moving through other people's lives. Jacob was just the latest example. Brian had been one before me. And that ex from the barbecue guest story? Probably another one in a line we'll never fully know. The difference now is that people are starting to say it out loud. And this time, I'm not the one they're questioning. Emily reappeared online after about a week of total silence. Her new post had a black and white photo and a long dramatic caption about growing through chaos and learning how it feels to be the villain in someone else's story. She didn't name anyone, but it didn't take much to figure out what she was hinting at. I didn't engage, but a few people forwarded it to me without me even asking. Everyone could see what it was, another attempt to reset the narrative. One friend added, She's clearly trying to turn this into her redemption arc. I didn't respond. I just archived the message and the screenshots and moved on. Amanda told me later that even more people had muted or unfollowed Emily since that post. Some were tired of the cryptic drama, others were just over the cycle. Apparently, one friend even commented on the post asking her to stop fishing for sympathy, and the comment was deleted within minutes. That same week, a group of neutral friends organized a hiking trip. No sides, no drama, just a weekend away with people who hadn't taken part in anything messy. I joined not knowing in advance who else was invited. I needed the break, and I figured it'd be good to reconnect with people who didn't bring up the past every 5 minutes. The trip started out great, the air was clear, the mood was light, and for once, the focus wasn't on who had said what, but halfway through the morning hike, Emily showed up. The host hadn't known about our history, and had extended the invite like it was just any other name on the list. She kept her distance all day, didn't speak to me, didn't make any scene, but the vibe changed immediately. Several people noticed. One guy quietly pulled me aside and asked, "Is something going on between you two?" Another friend later admitted Emily didn't seem like herself, tense, constantly looking around, and not quite fitting into the group dynamic like she used to. She no longer held the room like before. People weren't crowding around her. Conversations didn't orbit her anymore. Late in the afternoon, one of my newer friends mentioned that Emily had made small talk with her. Mostly harmless, but she had casually asked things like where I worked to now, if I was dating anyone, if I had said anything about the past. It wasn't blatant, but enough to raise a red flag. She brought it up to me afterward, saying it felt off, like she was trying to gather intel without making it obvious. I thanked the host privately for not warning Emily in advance. I actually preferred that. If she had known I'd be there, she could have twisted it ahead of time. The surprise worked in my favor. That night, things escalated. Screenshots from a private group chat started circulating. Emily had been mocking me behind the scenes, calling me fragile, overly emotional, and saying I couldn't handle being in the same room as her. She had sent those messages just days before the trip. They weren't subtle. Someone in that group, someone who had finally had enough, leaked the screenshots. They were tired of her using every gathering as a stage to insult people who weren't even present. The screenshots made the rounds fast, and a few people were genuinely shocked by the tone of her messages. I didn't confront her. I didn't post anything. I saved the screenshots and sent them to Amanda and 2 other people I trusted. Not to stir drama, just to have them in case she tried to spread another false version later. Quiet proof. Nothing more. Jacob, who hadn't said anything since the last fallout, asked a mutual friend to pass along a message, but I made it clear I didn't want to respond. He said he wanted to apologize for getting pulled in and say his piece. I didn't reply. He was blocked, and I had no interest in giving him a backdoor conversation. That chapter was closed for good. Work picked up around the same time. I got pulled into a big project with a tight deadline, and most of my energy went into that. A week later, I got recognized by leadership for how I handled the pressure. That moment hit different. It was the first time in months where my identity wasn't tied to any relationship or fallout or emotional cleanup. Just results. Just my own life. Looking back, I finally understood something I hadn't been able to put into words earlier. Cutting someone off isn't just about deleting numbers or blocking accounts. It's about unlearning how much of your time, your behavior, and even your personality had been shaped around managing them, around softening things for their comfort, adjusting your words to avoid their reactions, shrinking to avoid setting them off. The silence wasn't just peace from her. It was space to hear myself again. Months passed, and for the first time in over a year, Emily stopped being part of my daily world. There were no random pings, no new stories popping up, no updates unless someone else brought her name up in passing. Even that didn't happen much anymore. She had faded in the way people eventually do when you stop checking for them. In the meantime, my circle got smaller, but better. The people who had stayed loyal stuck around, and a few who once distanced themselves eventually admitted they had judged too early. We never made it a big conversation, but it became clear who was there because they cared, and who had just gone with the loudest voice in the room. One afternoon, Amanda mentioned that Emily had moved. Quietly, without telling anyone, she shifted to a different part of the city. She hadn't been seen at any group event since the screenshots leaked. Her name was barely mentioned anymore. It was like she had pulled another one of her resets, disappear, rebrand, return somewhere new. Not long after, I got a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in a while. We were never especially close, but we had enough shared connections to stay in the loop. Their message was simple. You were right to walk away. She's doing the same thing to someone new now. They didn't even have to explain who she was. It was obvious. The pattern had started again, just with a new name in place of mine. That message made one thing very clear. Emily never needed space. She needed exits, escape routes, a way to start over without ever admitting what came before. Space was just the word she used to make it sound graceful. A day or two later, someone who had strongly defended her in the early stages, someone who had once told me to move on and stop creating problems, dropped a short message in the group chat. I got it wrong. I should have asked questions. No drama, no argument, just that. Then they left the chat a few minutes later. Around the same time, I got an email I'd been hoping for. A job I'd applied to in another city offered me a position. It was something I'd been working toward quietly for months, part of my plan to move on without needing an excuse. I accepted it that same day. I planned a small farewell dinner, just the people who never asked me to shrink, explain, or prove anything. No speeches, No goodbye drama. Just a dinner with people who showed up when I needed them and never demanded anything in return. Before I left town, I met up with Brian. We grabbed a non-alcoholic drink and ended up talking for hours. We laughed about how long it took for Emily's patterns to finally become obvious to everyone else. For a long time, we both thought we were the only ones who saw it clearly. Turns out we just saw it early. A few days later, I saw one last thing. Emily had liked an old group photo from 6 months ago posted by a mutual friend using an alternate account she hadn't been blocked on. I recognized the account. She had used it before to view my story when she was blocked. This time I didn't react. I didn't block again. I didn't say anything. I just scrolled past it like it never happened. After the move, I deleted all social media apps for a month. Not because I was upset, I just didn't need them anymore. I wanted a fresh start without the noise, without the updates, without the pull of keeping tabs on people who were no longer part of my life. A week into the new job, someone forwarded me a screenshot of a new post from Emily's alternate account. Same vague tone, same kind of message. Something about being betrayed by those she supported the most. There were a few likes and a couple of vague supportive comments. I looked at it once, closed the message, and didn't think about it again. For the first time since all of this started, I laughed. Not in a bitter way, not at her, just at the predictability of it all, like watching the same movie with a different cast. I saved the timeline I had built, the one with dates, screenshots, and messages. Not for revenge, not to reopen anything, just for myself. A record of what happened and how far I had moved since then. She said she needed space. What I needed was distance, and this time I'm keeping it.